Welcome children. Today we will start the fourth chapter of civics for standard 9th, the electoral politics, and this is the first part of the lesson. Now in this chapter, electoral politics, we are going to learn about elections, why elections are necessary, how elections take place, and what is election. Now children, the procedure of election can be understood by the real example of Haryana Assembly elections. It will show how candidates standing in election become representatives and how power can be removed from their hands. Now the state of Haryana had been ruled by a Congress party-led government since 1982 and this chief minister was Bhajan Lal. In 1987, Haryana State Assembly elections are held. The opposition leader, Chaudhry Devilal, led a movement called Nyaya Yudh, Struggle for Justice, and formed a new party called Lok Dal. His party joined other opposition parties like the BJP to form a front against the Congress in the elections. In his election campaigns, Devilal said that if his party won the elections, his government would waive the loans of farmers and small businessmen. He promised that this would be the first action of the government. The people were unhappy with the existing government, that is the Congress government, and they were also attracted by Devilal's promise. So in 1987, when the elections were held, there were two major leaders who were fighting against each other. Congress-led Bhajan Lal and Lok Dal leader Chaudhry Devilal ji. So on the election day, people were very happy with Chaudhry Devilal ji and they voted in large numbers in favor of Lok Dal and its allies. There are total 90 seats in the State Legislative Assembly of Haryana. The Lok Dal and its partners won 76 out of 90 seats in the State Assembly. Now, the Lok Dal alone won 60 seats and thus had a clear majority in the Assembly. The Congress could win only 5 seats. Once the election results were announced, the Congress-led Chief Minister Bhajan Lal resigned. The governor then invited Devilal to be the new Chief Minister, and 3 days after the election results were declared, he became the Chief Minister. As soon as Devilal ji became the Chief Minister, he issued a government order waiving the outstanding loans of small farmers, agricultural laborers and small businessmen. His party ruled the state for 4 years. The next elections were held in 1991, but this time the Lok Dal did not win popular support. The Congress party won the elections and formed the government. Why do we need elections? Elections in our country, India, are held after every 5 years. Elections take place regularly in any democracy. There are more than 100 countries in the world in which elections take place to choose people's representatives. We also read that elections are held in many countries that are not democratic. So, why do we need elections? Now, why do we need elections? Let us imagine a democracy without elections. A rule of the people is possible without any elections if all the people can sit together every day and take all the decisions. But is it possible? Now, this is possible only in a small community. as we have already read in chapter 1, that this is not possible in a big or large community. Okay, nor is it possible for everyone to have the time and knowledge to take decisions on all matters. Therefore, in most democracies, people rule through their representatives. Children, is there a democratic way of selecting representatives without elections? Let us think of a place where representatives are selected on the basis of age and experience. Okay, or a place where they are chosen on the basis of education or knowledge. There could be some difficulty in deciding on who is more experienced or knowledgeable. But let's say the people can resolve these difficulties. Clearly, such a place does not require elections. But can we call this place a democracy? How do we find out if the people like their representatives or not? How do we ensure that these representatives rule as per the wishes of the people? How to make sure that those who the people don't like do not remain their representatives? Now, this requires a mechanism by which people can choose their representatives at regular intervals and change them if they wish to do so. This mechanism is called elections, and therefore elections are considered essential in our times for any representative democracy. In an election, the voters can make many choices. They can choose who will make laws for them. They can choose who will form the government and take major decisions. They can choose the party whose policies will guide the government and law making. Now, what makes an election democratic? Elections can be held in many ways. All democratic countries hold elections, but most non-democratic countries also hold some kind of elections. So how do we distinguish democratic elections from any other elections? And we have discussed this briefly in chapter 1. Okay, we have discussed many examples of countries where elections are held but they can't really be called democratic elections. So let us recall some of the simple list of minimum conditions of a democratic election. Now let us discuss the minimum conditions of a democratic election. First, everyone should be able to choose. This means that everyone should have one vote and every vote should have equal value. Second, there should be something to choose from. Parties and candidates should be free to contest elections and should offer some real choice to the voters. Third, the choice should be offered at regular intervals. Elections must be held regularly after every few years. Fourth, the candidate preferred by the people should get elected. And the fifth is elections should be conducted in a free and fair manner where people can choose as they really wish. So these conditions look very simple and easy, but there are not many countries where these are not fulfilled. In this chapter, we will apply these conditions to the elections held in a country to see if we can call these democratic elections. Now, is it good to have political competition? Yes, elections are all about competition. Without competition, elections would become meaningless. For example, if there is a horse race, now in the horse race, if only one single horse participates in the competition, who is going to win? Obviously, that same single horse is going to win the competition. That is why it is necessary to have political competition. Now, political competitions take place when different political parties compete to gain confidence and ultimately the vote of the voters. They make promises and give incentives to motivate the voters. There are certain disadvantages of political competition. First, it creates a sense of division, okay, or disunity among the people. The second disadvantage is the political parties start blaming each other and get dragged into unhealthy competition. Now, different political parties and candidates often use dirty tricks like booth capturing to win elections, and that is why good people do not enter and participate in political competition. Our constitution makers were very aware of these problems, yet they opted for a free competition in elections as the way to select our future leaders. This they did so because this system works better in the long run. Now, in an ideal world, all political leaders know what is good for the people and are motivated only by a desire to serve them. Political competition here is not necessary in such an ideal world, but that is not what happens in real life. Today, leaders are not made to serve the people, but they fight elections to get the biggest post and the maximum benefits. So, in such a situation, political competition is important. If the leader works according to the public, then his popularity will increase and his chances of winning in the next election will also increase. And if the leader does not work according to the public, then he will not be able to win the next elections. Now, what is our system of elections? Can we say the election system in India is democratic? To answer this, let us look into some of the points. Now in India, Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha elections are held regularly after every 5 years. The Lok Sabha elections are held at the central level to elect the Prime Minister, and the Vidhan Sabha elections are held at the state level to elect the Chief Ministers. Okay, elections are held in all constituencies at the same time, either on the same day or within a few days, and this is called as the general election. Sometimes election is held only for one constituency to fill the vacancy caused by the death or a resignation of a member. This is called as by-elections. Electoral constituencies. Children, you have just heard about the people of Haryana electing 90 MLAs. Now you may have wondered, how did they do that? Did every person in Haryana vote for all the 90 MLAs? No, that is not the case. In our country, we follow an area-based system of representation. Now, what is area-based system of representation? The country is divided into different small units or areas for the purpose of election depending upon the population of that area. These areas are called as electoral constituencies. The voters who live in an area elect one representative. Let me give you an example. This map is of Valsad district. Okay, now I live in Valsad, which is in South Gujarat, closer to Bombay, and you can see the entire Valsad district has been divided into 6 constituencies. You can see Umargaon, Vapi, Pardi, Valsad, Dharampur, Kaprada. Okay, but I will vote for the candidate who stands from Valsad constituency. I will not vote for the other candidates who are standing from other constituencies. I will only vote for the candidate who stands from the Valsad constituency. That is known as area-based representation. Now for the Lok Sabha elections, the country is divided into 543 constituencies. The representatives elected from each constituency is called a Member of Parliament or an MP. One of the features of the democratic election is that every vote should have equal value, and that is why in our constitution it's written that that each constituency should have roughly equal population living within it. So the entire country is divided into small units depending on the population of the state, and accordingly constituencies are made. Okay, so total in the entire country is divided into 543 constituencies. Similarly, each state is divided into a specific number of assembly constituencies. Like you have learned earlier, Haryana, depending on the population of that state, the entire state was divided into 90 constituencies. And the elected representatives who are elected from these constituencies are called as member of legislative assemblies or MLAs. Now the same principle is applied for the local elections, that is for the panchayat and municipal election. Now each village or town is divided into several wards that are like constituencies. Each ward elects one member of the village or the urban local body, and sometimes these constituencies are counted as seats. For each constituency represents one seat in the assembly. That is why when we say Lokdal won 60 seats in Haryana, it means that 60 candidates of Lokdal won in 60 assembly constituencies in the state, and thus Lok Sabha had 60 MLAs in the state assembly. Moving ahead, reserved constituencies. Now our constitution makers were worried that in an open electoral competition, certain weaker sections may not stand a good chance to get elected to the Lok Sabha or the state legislative assembly. So they were worried what will happen to the weaker sections of the society. Our constitution makers were worried about the weaker sections of the society because they may not have the required resources, the education and the contacts to contest and win elections against others. Those who are influential and resourceful may prevent them from winning elections, and if this happens, our parliament and assembly would be deprived of the voice of a significant section of our population, and this would make our democracy less representative and less democratic. So our makers of the constitution thought of a special system called reserved constituencies for the weaker section. Some constituencies are reserved for the people who belong to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. In a scheduled caste reserved constituency, only someone who belongs to the scheduled caste can stand for elections. Now similarly, we can see that those belonging to the scheduled tribes can contest an election from a constituency that is reserved for scheduled tribes. Currently in Lok Sabha, there are 84 seats are reserved for scheduled caste and 47 for scheduled tribe. Now this number is in proportion to their share in the total population. Thus, the reserved seats for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes do not take away the legitimate share of other social groups. Now, this system of reservation was extended later to other weaker sections at the district and local level. In many states, seats in the rural and urban areas also reserved for the weaker section. In the local level also we see seats reserved for the weaker section and other backward classes, that is OBC as well. However, the proportion of seats reserved varies from state to state depending on their population. Now similarly we see 1/3 of the seats reserved in rural and urban local bodies for women candidates also. So children, with this we come to an end to the first part of the lesson. Very soon I'll coming up with the second part. Till then, do view and subscribe. Thank you.